Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you for this very important hearing. Let me first welcome Mr. Harold Shaw, the Chief Security Officer of the Massachusetts Port Authority, to our subcommittee. Among many responsibilities, Massport owns and operates the airports, including Logan Airport in Boston, that connect Massachusetts and New England to the world. Massport epitomizes professionalism and always puts safety and security first, and I am pleased, Mr. Shaw, that you are here to represent that incredible group of professionals. Today, we only need to look up to see that the future is already here. Drones are increasingly present in people's everyday lives, and this technology has the potential to revolutionize the way we live and conduct business. Imagine a world where drones deliver your packages, groceries, school supplies directly to your doorstep, where drones serve as early warning systems, platform search and rescue missions, and provide critical aid to those in need, where drones find our missing pets, inspect our critical infrastructure, and even take out our garbage. The possibilities are actually endless. Yet, like all technology, there is a Dickensian quality to drones. It is the best of inventions and the worst of inventions simultaneously. So today we explore the degrading and debasing side of drones. We must acknowledge that although drones offer many benefits, there are also safety and privacy risks that we need to quickly address. With more and more drones taking flight every day, the risk of a drone colliding with a jumbo jet continues to rise. During December of 2018, in an incident at Gatwick in Great Britain, reports of a drone sighting on the runway led to 33 hours of disruptive travel. The BBC reported that 1,000 flights were canceled or delayed as planes were grounded, and that 140,000 passengers were caught up in the chaos. Drones have similarly been sighted at Logan Airport in Boston during the past year. Thankfully, travel was not disrupted, but the economic consequences of drone delays at airports could be enormous. More importantly, should a drone like this actually strike a plane or a helicopter, the consequences and loss of life would be catastrophic, and it would change air travel in our country forever. We need to be thinking about how to prevent such threats before tragedy strikes. And we must also keep in mind that airports are not the only danger zone. The sky is an open road, and drones can fly anywhere. So, we thank each of our witnesses for your willingness to testify here today. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very important hearing and look forward to your testimony. Although the FAA has been charged with the primary responsibility to integrate drones into the national airspace, it is often state and local organizations like Massport that must be ready to take proactive measures to identify, track, and possibly mitigate threats in real time. As you note in your testimony, Mr. Shaw, the federal government simply lacks the capability to provide robust, persistent coverage against drone threats across the entire nation. That's why we'll continue to rely on organizations like Massport to fill the void. Mr. Shaw, given this responsibility, what tools and legal authority should we provide to state and local agencies like Massport so that they can defend airports from the risk associated with drones flying in flight paths which could have catastrophic effects?
Thank you, Senator Markey. First and foremost, at the local level, there are no authorities that have been actually pushed down for whether it be the Mass State Police or Massport Police in Massport's perspective to be able to act or respond to a drone incident. Unfortunately, we don't have the technologies in place to respond, nor do we actually have the legal framework. And as Dr. Hickale even mentioned, to be able to counter and respond to any type of incident specific at Massport, no pun intended, but we're flying blind at this point. What we need to be able to do is to advance, not only the discussion, but our ability to be able to affect a uniformed, a balanced, and a smart response is to be able to push authorities down to the state and local level. They are the first response requirements, where we can in turn lean on them to be able to hopefully react and respond to any type of drone incident, specifically within our environment. On a day-to-day basis, we look at, Massport or really any other large international airport as its own special event. You're really looking at, for Massport in particular, 140,000 passengers traverse through the airport on any given day. So the federal government has done a very good job in terms of preparing for special events, whether it be the Boston Marathon, whether it be a Super Bowl event, or any other major event across the country. What we're confronted with on a day-to-day basis is our own special event. And how do we in turn equip law enforcement and first response entities with those appropriate tools to be able to adequately and effectively respond if we were confronted with a similar event to that of Gatwick.
So do you want the FAA to give you authority to do your own individual counter measures?
Not specifically to Massport, but
I don't mean you, I mean-
to law enforcement that in turn supports Massport, or similar to what happened with the incursion over Fenway Park. The ability for the Boston Police Department to effectively respond, to that threat. At this point in time, albeit, whether it be DHS or the FBI, they've done a very, very good job in terms of dealing with greater events. But day in and day out, they just don't necessarily have the bandwidth nor the resources to be able to cover each and every one of the major airports across the country.
So you believe that individual law enforcement agencies across the country should be given this authority to be able to act proactively?
Appropriately scoped, sir.
Appropriately, yeah.
Yes, sir.
You agree with that, Ms. Stubblefield?
Sir, to be clear, FAA doesn't give the authority. Actually, the prohibitions that constrain the ability of law enforcement to act against UAS are actually from Title 18 and Title 49, and those are the authorities that have been granted to DHS and
Okay, well,
Justice,
I think it's
et cetera.
time then for us, that is the Congress, to think about modifying that authority so that we deal with this tsunami of threats which are going to be out there and allow for there to be additional protections which are provided to the public. Ms. Stubblefield.
Yes, sir. But if I may, on a couple of different counts. One, there is the ability to use legal detection capability, of which Massachusetts Police actually does have that capability in some circumstances, so that you can identify where UAS are, and in some cases, depending on the technology that you're using, identify where the operator is, and be able to get law enforcement to that operator to engage and be able to get that drone down
What
safely.
other authority would you want, Mr. Shaw?
Just to kind of that one point, that is not respected to the airport, environment in particular. We have incidental coverage through the state police at this point in time. One of the things that we're looking at is, is there an ability to be able to push some of the authorities that in turn have been, passed to whether it be DHS or DOJ, and be able to allow, specifically our state and local authorities to be able to respond, react, and be able to utilize the law respective to their own personal benefit.
Okay, so what, if I may ask, so it's important that you can identify the problem.
Yes, sir.
But what can you do to mitigate it, to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place? What authority do you have?
At this point in time, there is no authorities to be able to actually mitigate the threat.
Do they have any authority, Ms. Stubblefield, to mitigate, to prevent?
So, sir, I think I'd like to make a distinction, because I think your point about prevention is important. And outreach and education are a significant part of,
Outreach and education to whom?
to UAS operators.
No,
to-
but I'm
to the
talking
public.
about, we're talking here about authority for Massport and other entities like that.
So
Should they have an ability to mitigate?
the challenge-
Be able to act preventatively?
So the challenge that we face today with mitigation authority, aside from the legal constraints, which certainly you and your
I'm saying, I
colleagues
understand. We might have to
could
change
remedy.
the authority, yeah.
But I think it's important to understand that the current counter-UAS technology that exists out there for use, which is largely based on military-built technology used in places where we don't have considerable concern about the collateral impacts, when used in civil environments, has significant impacts that can create tremendous safety
No, I
hazards.
appreciate that, but I would trust the Boston Police or Massport to be able to make that decision in the context of Boston, its population, what the threat is, as they've identified it. So, so I appreciate what you're saying. Obviously, we're a densely populated population, but when there's a drone flying over Fenway Park, the consequences could be catastrophic, especially if it might have been able to be identified at an earlier stage. What would be wrong with that if Massport, working with Boston Police, State Police, had identified it earlier?
The identification,
I don't mean identify and then take action.
the action piece, sir, is that the tools that are available
Right.
can cause significant safety impacts. They can onboard avionics of manned aircraft. They can impact the operation of air navigation services infrastructure that we use for manned aircraft. When you target
I
a,
appreciate what you're saying, but the problem is this: the problem can't be so dangerous that that these agencies should be aware of it, but yet not dangerous enough that they have authority to act in a preemptive way. So we're caught in no man's land in terms of the protection of the public. And so what if they purchased, what if Massport, for example, was the lead in building in all the protections after 9/11? We went first in almost everything, brought in Israeli experts, because obviously Mohammed Atta and the other 9 had hijacked the 2 planes from Logan. So we went first, and understandably so, and we're quite proud of that. Much of what goes on in the rest of the country is in consultation with what Massport did. So these people are expert, and they were acting in ways that obviously the federal government had not acted in terms of building in safeguards. So part of my, concern here is that we're caught in a situation where highly qualified law enforcement officials want the authority and the tools to be able to deal with something, and yet you're saying that the statute does not allow them to do so, and that you're thinking that that's justifiable because of the risk that would be created if Massport had that authority.
yes, sir, the technology is problematic. It's a challenge, and that's why testing, that we talked about earlier, is so important to try to drive the industry towards capabilities that don't have that impact on the safety systems that are depended upon for the
I appreciate
airspace
that.
system.
Yeah, but again, at Massport, they would be expert on this. So let me ask this: what additional things would you like, Mr. Shaw, for the FAA to be doing to prevent a scenario like that which unfolded at Gatwick? What additional?
And so I fully understand, the challenges. This is a tough situation. Really, and I think to boil it down into really 3 6 points is we're looking for, similar to what the FAA, wants to be able to roll out, is a system that is going to effectively identify. We want a system that is integrated, not only from the tower, but all the way down to local law enforcement. So that response is, quick and it's efficient. And then we want an ability to be able to mitigate or interdict a threat, and I know it may be, a little while to be able to get to that point, but the reality behind it is that if we can build something within that framework, and move that process along, I think we as airport operators are going to, feel a lot more comfortable about, the safety, the security and safety of the traveling public, our communities and our employees. Fully understand that, in terms of some of these technologies that are out there, they may have adverse impact in terms of avionics and so forth. So it needs to be, a balanced approach in terms of how this stuff would ultimately, work.
Mr. Shaw, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I think we need a conversation between you, but
Yes, sir.
all of those agencies out there, and Ms. Stubblefield, and DHS. We need some kind of conversation that takes place. We need a balance that is struck here, and right now, I don't think we have a full balance, which has been created, and I think it's going to be something that's very important, and I think this hearing has helped to ensure that that kind of lack of resolution of these issues has yet been reached. Let me just ask you again, Ms. Stubblefield, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2016 directed the FAA to develop standards for remotely identifying drone operators and owners within 2 years of enactment of this law. By July 2018, the FAA was supposed to issue final regulations for remote identification based on those standards. Today, nearly a year and a half after that deadline, the FAA has published no such guidelines or guidance. In fact, the FAA recently announced that it intends to only publish a notice of proposed rulemaking in September of this year. A final rule is nowhere in sight, notwithstanding the congressional mandate. In April, I sent a letter along with Senator Thune urging the FAA to swiftly publish a proposed rule for the remote identification of drones. At the time, the FAA expected this proposed rule to be issued by July 21st, so the current timeline for a September notice of proposed rulemaking represents an even further delay. Ms. Stubblefield, please explain what is causing the FAA delay on this critical rulemaking. Do you still plan to release the proposal in September? And when will there be a final rule?
Yes, sir. So as to the delay, it primarily has been focused on the fact that until we had the authority over recreational users, which are about 1 million of the 1.4 million drone registrations that we have, it was very hard to construct a rule that would meet congressional intent. And we are very appreciative that we regained that authority in October. It's a very complex rule, and there are a number of stakeholders to be taken into consideration as we work through that rule. It is critical that we get this right, because it is foundational not only from the security perspective, but the safety perspectives as well.
Time is of the essence. Mr. Shaw, how important is a remote ID rulemaking for the country?
Critically important, Senator. It only takes one incident to occur that would, if it was a catastrophic incident that would occur specifically in an airport, it would set us all back, significantly. Time is of the essence, and we need not only the rules, but the technologies in place to be able to appropriately protect the critical infrastructures.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Time is of the essence here. We just got to get this done. You're long past the deadline to do the proposed rulemaking. So this is the box in which the drone that I held up earlier in the hearing came in, and it just says quite clearly on the box, "Made in China." So this is what every American is facing when they try to buy a drone. So one of my questions to you then, again, Mr. Wingo, we need to provide Americans ways to deal with the privacy compromise that can occur, not only for our critical infrastructure, but for individual citizens. There are real privacy concerns here, real security concerns. So what can we do? What's your recommendation to all these Americans that already own a drone made in China?
Thank you. One of the first things is to understand the risk so that you can mitigate the risk. And you just went a long way towards calling that out on the national stage. I have here a French-made drone, and obviously components come from China, but this is Parrot. They're number 2, but far behind DJI. So there you have privacy, things like GDPR, and if you're looking at where data storage happens, that's a whole different issue. I would go back to saying buy American. And there we have more jurisdiction. If you look at how control happens with our cloud, I worked for Google for a couple years.
Is this a Huawei issue to you?
It is a, yes, it is.
You put it in the same category?
I'd put it in the same category.
Wow. Yeah, that's very serious. So we have to really think about what you're saying, and again, when you just mentioned the European privacy laws, which would cover the French making their device. Is that what you're saying?
It is, although I'm saying I think there's an American way that if we roll our sleeves up and bring the engine of innovation that we have in this country, and we unleash through the right-minded regulations, or no regulations where they're not required, and allow U.S. companies to take the field. That's really a better way to protect privacy.
It is, as long as we, in the United States, animate these inanimate objects with our values. We have to do
Exactly.
that. The Chinese animate them with their values, which are inconsistent with ours. The French have their values, but from my perspective, that's why I intend to reintroduce my Drone Aircraft Privacy and Transparency Act, so that we create our own American set of guidelines for who we are and how we should be interacting with these new technologies.
Yes, sir. I was looking for a chance to hold up my copy of the Constitution, but if we have U.S.-made drones, we can infuse all of those values, as you said, into that. Right now, as we continue to buy China, it comes with all of those approaches to privacy and security.
Thank you, sir.